code has been recently donated to Apache. There's a new upcoming Apache incubator project being called Corinthia, and it's now up to Peter to tell us more about it.
Okay.
And Lewis, sorry.
And yes, I should mention Lewis Cyrus Potts is my collaborator. Well, we've been working together to make this open source. We've been talking for quite a long time about this, and it's finally happening. So that's exciting. So I guess we'll start. I'll just kind of run through.
Let me know when you want me to leap in or
yes. Okay. So open source Office apps, right? Very important, right? We all want to see open source succeed. We want to see it continue to be widely used. But there's a bit of a problem, and that is that the computing landscape has changed tremendously since the 1990s when OpenOffice was originally sort of, a lot of it was designed and built. And just even some of the most basic assumptions about what we have available to build on are now different compared to what we had 20 years ago. So back in the 1990s, everybody was using desktops, right? And, desktop Office suites have a long history. Microsoft Office, of course, OpenOffice, LibreOffice, iWork, there's a number of different Office suites, but they're the most common. But what we've seen in the last 5 years or so is the emergence of two entirely new classes of application platforms. Now there's the web. Now the web's kind of been touted as a platform for, since the beginning pretty much. And, even though in the late 90s you could build applications on the web, they were very basic in terms of what you could do on the client side. You'd have server-side logic. Basically, all the interactivity would be via posting forms and stuff like that. And it's really only in the last kind of 5 years that it's become a really capable platform. Maybe 6, 7, 8 years. But today, it's a very capable platform. It's very high-performance, mature, standards-based implementations of HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, SVG, and so forth. And it's just really very still not quite there yet, but it's maturing very fast. We also, of course, have mobile, right? Since the iPhone came out in 2007, that was kind of the flip the switch that's now a platform. And Android came along, and I think there's what was the other one? It starts with a W. I think
WebOS perhaps.
No. It was something by Microsoft that they did.
OS.
Yeah, Windows Mobile.
Symbian.
Yeah.
Oh,
Symbian
did anyone ever use Windows Mobile?
I don't think so, but there's been some other attempts. Symbian, yeah. Anyway, so mobile is big now. Here's the problem: open source is not there. It's on the desktop, but there's just this kind of giant blind spot for open source. And if open source Office suites are to have a future, they need to be on web and they need to be on mobile.
It's more than just the Office suites with the future. It's, I think, actually a lot of open source, because how did Microsoft conquer the desktop? Not just with Windows, but with Microsoft Office. Remember how in the good old days, 90s, we would steal Office from the corporation and take it home. That's basically the marketing program that Microsoft was using implicitly. Well, it conquered the desktop through Office. It's ubiquitous now. It had a hegemony, as we would call it in the good old days, when we were battling Microsoft. It ruled the desktop because of Office. Because people want to do work, they used Microsoft Office. Where did they use Microsoft Office? On Windows, maybe Macintosh too. But Microsoft prevailed and became incredibly rich through Office.
That's revisionist. That's a revisionist approach.
It's totally revisionist. That's totally Marxian too. So what we're seeing here, though, is something potentially similar and equally scary. That's to say, where do you see open source on mobile for productivity suites?
Open source isn't even competing right now.
No, it's not competing, but as I mentioned the other day, this only Office, there is an open source version of it.
This is a focus of people who would be using it. For example, you made a good point. There's always going to be examples. So, for example, I could have said there's Calibra there. There's a whole bunch of other things there.
I'm not talking about
But the point is, one can cite. I'm going to point why your argument is actually both good and at the same time bad. It's good because you're raising correct points about data. Okay. It's bad because if we can say, oh, these examples exist, so therefore we don't really have to worry about the threat posed to open source. I know they don't want to argue that, but I'm just saying that's how people can interpret that argument and why we're trying to be, in this case, as black and white, stark. Because we think that a lot of people in Apache, anywhere in the world, are not perceiving the threat that is being posed to open source by mobile.
We turn the contrast up to 100% on this diagram. So yes, okay, there's a little bit being done in that area, but if you kind of round it off to the nearest whole number, it's nothing. So, I've got probably 100 apps on my phone. None of them are open source. Right? So we need to be there. So what do we need to do to get there? Well, we need code that's portable, right? Now, portable, it used to be that if you wanted to write portable code, well, you do it in Java, right? Now, Java has many good things going for it. Can debate whether or not it's necessarily the best programming language, but certainly the Java virtual machine is very widely deployed among a lot of platforms, and there's other programming languages that you can compile into the JVM. But unfortunately, if you want to target iOS, you're out of luck with Java. So
Android as well.
Android, well, you can compile. Android has a different VM, but you can compile Java code on Android for the most part.
Okay.
Anyway, rounding off, right? Contrast.
Okay.
You must be great at dinner parties. Hey, you're going to sit next to Edward. No.
Okay, so well, it's kind of weird and bizarre the way that platforms have evolved that JavaScript is now the VM. That's like the one common thing that's everywhere. Everywhere can run JavaScript.
This is when about 5 years ago, when I'd go around the world giving presentations, everyone in developing nations was learning Java. That's what all the students were learning, Java, because they were doing web development. Last time I did something like that, people were doing JavaScript because they were doing mobile. It was incredible.
And especially now that you have things like
both web and mobile.
But you
JavaScript.
can't. Yeah, I can't run C# code in my browser. Anyway, so especially with things like Node on the server side, and the fact that with Windows 8 you can write Metro apps or modern UI apps using JavaScript. So it's really everywhere, and it's also become a very performant language. I mean, it just amazes me the stuff that they've been able to do in terms of optimizations, and with the Java VMs now, it really is truly impressive. And even they've got ASM.js, right, where there's a special dialect of JavaScript, and if it detects that, and it's valid JavaScript code, it will run in an interpreter. But if Firefox sees that, then it will say, oh, okay, I can see that, and it will compile it to native code, and it's like within 2 times, within a factor of 2 performance of C. So there's some really amazing stuff that's happened with JavaScript. We've also got, very importantly, very mature layout engines for doing all of the display calculations. Where does this text go on the page? How does this box fit? Does the text wrap around the image and stuff? And there's been a lot of really great work done by Apple and Google on WebKit, and by Firefox, and belatedly by Microsoft. They do eventually get there. I'll give them that. So we need to kind of look at this as sort of an answer to portability.
And it's also an opportunity, a major opportunity. And I'm not sure that we're taking it fully advantage of. I think that this is one main thing that we're looking at. One way of getting rid of the problem or evading the problem that is being presented here.
Another thing which I think is extremely important is to minimize dependencies, Right? We don't want some sort of bloated monolithic thing that you have to compile from 6 different languages and you've got to have 100 different libraries. And, just hypothetically, I know there may be projects like that out there, but we want something small and lean and easy to kind of get building.
When you were
and the DOM and the various browsers, there are incompatibilities between Internet Explorer, between the WebKits, and with significant incompatibility.
That's correct. And so again, this is a matter of rounding off to the nearest whole number. So there are compatibility issues, yes, but they can be gotten around. So if you look around at plugins like jQuery, for example, we're not using jQuery, but jQuery does abstract over a lot of the differences between the browser runtimes. So yes, you are correct, but for the most part, they tend to be fairly compatible. If you're willing to do a bit of work to make sure that it tests on all of them.
And their incompatibilities pale in comparison to the difficulties that we had with, for example, OpenOffice, which was written before the internet, basically. It wasn't really, but it had the mindset of prior to the internet. So everything was in it, everything was interlaced, everything was dependent upon each other, and it was extraordinarily difficult to work with at first. And it still is to some extent, and that actually determines the nature of the community that's going to be sustaining as opposed to it. So we want something that learns from the past and that tries to be agile, as it were, or lean, if you want to use another popular term, but something that is not requiring a vast monolith of developers just as there is a vast monolith of code.
One thing you have to remember with portability is also we don't need to solve the whole world in one step, but we need to make the code portable so when we have a new platform we want to support, it's easy to put in.
Yeah. So we can put a big sign saying, developers, we want you to do this. This is a challenge.
Yep.
And the developer would actually come and knock on the door.
And potentially even a company who is coming along who's got a new platform and they want to get this running on their platform. Maybe maybe there's an incentive for them to get involved in.
Absolutely. So Edward, you have a company. I mean, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Another thing, don't impose a UI toolkit, right? There's, one approach to cross-platform development says, well, let's use something like Qt or GTK or a similar sort of toolkit. I think OpenOffice has its own one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And yes, you can do a portable application for desktop systems, but it never really feels native. I mean, even OpenOffice on my Mac, it never really feels like a Mac.
Because they used the wrong cross development. Like if they used WX widgets, they would have had that, and they would have had that look. But that's
they would have the look, but they wouldn't have the user experience.
That's the whole point of WX.
Yeah, but there's stuff like no. This is a very good point. This is a very good point. Let me illustrate an example. Apple have introduced a new feature with OS 10.10, the latest release, Yosemite, and iOS 8, and it's called Handoff. And what it is if you have an application where you have a Mac version and you have an iOS version, then you can have the application state on your iPad, for example. So you can be editing a document on your iPad, and then you can go up to your Mac, you can put it down on your desk, and the Mac will say, oh, I can see your iPad's nearby. Tap here if you want to go across to the Mac version of the app and continue working on your document there. And when you do that, in an application defined manner, it provides the ability to move your state across. Now, you have to write code explicitly to support that. But if you can represent your state in a way that can be sent across the network, the user goes up to the computer, puts their iPad on the desk, taps a button on the Mac, and straight away they're working on the document on the Mac, just like that, right? Now, no UI toolkit is going to do that, right? Because it's an inherently very Apple-specific thing, right? And you can abstract over buttons and scroll bars and checkboxes and lists and things like that, but you can't abstract meaningfully over stuff like that, I would argue. because there's very different ways of doing things. Same with, notification center widgets, right? I mean, how are you going to do something like that works on Windows and Mac and Linux and iOS and Android, So my argument is that let's kind of separate the UI out from the core parts of it, so that if somebody's able to build a cross-platform API, fantastic. Cross-platform UI, fantastic. But we don't want to make that a prerequisite to using the code, right? So the idea is that people can use this to build a range of different applications, right? So there might be an open source Office suite that's targeted at desktops that's using this code as the base. Or, there could be that, but there could also be, commercial apps that people develop. So we have UX Write, which is a commercial product which we're selling, which is based on these libraries, which I'll talk about the libraries in a bit more detail in a moment. And that's, people can build their own commercial products around it if they want to. They can build their own open source products around it, but we're not imposing that you have to do the UI based on this particular tool.
Which is really important. Branding for any kind of product that you're creating out, that's a different issue. This is code, and this is basically the
It's back-end.
fundamental.
It's back-end code.
And not imposing this on people who would be coming to it, frees them to be ideally creative and innovative.
Okay, so HTML. So there's been a lot of discussion about what should be the standard for Office documents, right? There was this whole thing about ODF and OXML and this battle, and people spent years trying to petition governments and having these worldwide bodies to try and come and sort of agree on a format. And I'm sure you all know the story. It's been told many times. And what we've ended up with is we don't have a single standard, right? And I will bet a lot of money on the fact that I don't think we are ever going to have a single standard that the world agrees on for everything. We have OXML, we have ODF, we have Markdown, we have some people use, like Hugh Howey mentioned that in the keynote he mentioned that he uses RTF for some of his writing, and there's people still using .doc, and so there's all these different file formats. So we need a way to translate between those, which I'll talk about in a moment. But we need to have a format for our editor, and the way that the format that I chose for UX Write, which is where this code originated, was HTML. And the very simple reason why I chose that is because I was lazy. Because I didn't want to have to implement a layout engine. I mean, that takes years. I didn't want to have to implement my own parser. I didn't want to have, this WebKit does all this stuff. It gives you this stuff for free, right? And it does stuff like GPU acceleration. I mean, think about how hard that is to implement, And modern browser runtimes are very powerful in terms of the rendering capabilities and the performance they have. HTML, I would argue, is the most widely used document format in the world. More than OXML, more than ODF, for the simple reason that that's what every web page is, right? Everybody understands HTML. How many people here, put up your hands if you are familiar with details of any aspect of ODF or OXML. How many people here could write an ODF or OXML document by hand in a text editor? I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I couldn't, right? I would have to refer to my codes, right? How many? For those with your hands up, how many of you would want to write an ODF document by hand in the text editor?
Question,
right?
Oh,
Well, but you can generate it.
Yes, you can generate it, but think about how complex it is relative to HTML.
Well,
So this is PDF.
Do you want to write that by hand? Yeah. Svanti.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on using HTML, CSS as the vehicle for the application as a UI format. But we should not mix up that because the browser is the native application for the file format HTML, CSS. that this is a competition between ODF, XML, and HTML, CSS. All that we are doing, or that we should do, is that we are a state machine of we load, we transform a document, might be ODF or XML, into the state machine, and then we have user actions, and there's expected output that comes again, that's ODF or XML. So to me, it's a black box, and I love
So you suggest
HTML, CSS.
That's what WebODF did. Well, WebODF took basically direct the files, did a little bit of transforms, jammed it out as ODF, has the CSS map, presented this way, ran the editor, and dumped it back out. So
Yes, but ODF, it's ODF in the browser.
Yes.
So it actually renders the tree.
It is.
In that, yeah.
Every browser-based ODF editor, just for the sake of explanation, an ODF application is any program, black box, that is able to load and save a valid ODF file format. And I assume it's even a byte array, yes, because when you just put in the whole zip into the byte array and put it out, right? By definition, it's not a very good definition. Yes, they're missing a lot of tests, but I'm fine. But we shouldn't mix up now the success of HTML. If coming back, if there's a bank or if it's legal with a bank would have a spreadsheet with formula, then they want to have a definition what the expected outcome is with expected income.
This is
The bank example. Let me take you up on that bank
All right.
example, because that's a very good example. You have to pick a format to use. You have to pick a data model to use for your editor, right? You don't want to have to write a different editor for every file format.
So wait, when you say
common,
use, you're talking to a developer.
Yes,
And so let's find this point here, is that you're talking to the developer when you say you have to pick a format to be working on for the application to be dealing with.
Yes. Okay. So, and I think the example of currency is a good one, right? Every country has a currency that it uses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here it's florins. You know, many countries in Europe obviously use the euro. In Australia, we have the Australian dollar. There's the Thai baht and so forth. And if you're in Australia, all your transactions are in Australian dollars. But sometimes you want to buy something from overseas, or if you travel to another country, you might use US dollars or euros or something. So it's not that the Australian dollar is better than every other currency, right? It's just that that's what Australia chose to use. And there is the ability to exchange that currency for other currencies where you need to do so. Did you have something?
No, everything was chosen.
Okay.
Not because
Sorry,
you
are you okay?
Australian dollars.
Yeah. Okay.
But I just ask a question.
Yeah.
HTML, CSS is a native file format.
Mhm.
Do you mean by that a native file format for word processor document?
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean native format in the same way that it's a native format for a web browser.
I think you mean it a little bit different, Peter, because what you're going to present in a little while can save in ODF, can save in XML, but internally for the editor, HTML is used, and it can also, but remark the word, also be saved as HTML.
Right. That's a good
Yes.
point. Or anything else that can be made available that way.
But maybe we wait until your presentation is over before we discuss.
Yeah, let's come back to that. And I've actually there's another talk on tomorrow, and I can't remember what time it is, but that talk is devoted entirely to the file format conversion library, so I'll be going into a lot of detail. Yeah.
The reason why HTML is important, besides all the reasons you already listed, we want to lower the bar for developers to come into the project and start working on it. That's why it's kind of important.
And there's tons of people who have experience writing JavaScript to manipulate the DOM to do with HTML.
ODF raises the bar because the application, even though ODF is a superior format, the application to express ODF is difficult.
But that's part of the discussion.
Right. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify the points here. Why it's important here.
So yeah, it's not a matter of it being superior. It's in an absolute sense. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's well understood. Okay, so it's not perfect, obviously. No format is, right? But there's some pros and cons. So I've already talked basically about all of the cons, about all of the pros. What are the downsides? Well, probably the first and most important downside is that HTML is not, it's not suited well to page-based formatting or page-based layout. In theory, it is, in the sense that the CSS spec has things like, put a page break here, and it has directives where you can say, I want to put this in the header and this in the footer and so forth, and it's got counters so that in theory you can, put the current page number at the bottom and so forth. But that just isn't really implemented properly in any of the major browser engines. There are a couple of implementations that do that quite well. One is there's a product called Prince XML, and that is designed for book publishers. There are some book publishers who use HTML as their format for their books, and they use Prince XML to generate publication quality output from HTML and CSS, and that does support things like headers and footers and pagination and things like that. But the major web browser runtimes don't do that, but maybe one day they will. So that is one of the limitations, and not most people don't really think of HTML when they think of word processing, right? It's kind of a I don't know why. I don't see, apart from the kind of the pagination thing, I don't see any fundamental technical reason why you wouldn't use HTML.
At the start, you did.
Sorry?
That was the whole point of HTML at the start.
Yeah, that's the whole point. But I mean, everybody's sending around docx files, So, and of course, this is, I'm mainly really talking about word processing here because that's what I've been working on for the last 3 years. But I think there's some things that we can do to sort of move towards spreadsheets and presentations, and drawings. SVG is supported in all the major browser engines, but it's really only well suited properly to text documents. Now, you'll notice that not ODF is listed both as a pro and a con, right? So the fact that it's not ODF means that, well, all this kind of ODF effort that's gone and the tools around to deal with ODF, they won't work directly with HTML files. I'll come to you in a second. But the benefit is that it's a lot simpler and more widely understood. Yes?
It's a little bit unfortunate because the slides are a little bit provoking.
That was deliberate.
So it's very hard to wait until the end of the presentation.
Go ahead. We want this. This is the whole point of this, is to have this discussion. So
We're small
It
enough.
would be nice to have the entire presentation. But CSS is difficult.
Mhm.
It's not easy.
Mhm.
If you think about the printing part, that's extremely important for organizations and companies.
Mhm.
And if cascading style sheets, the print media part of it, I think it was even there in cascading style sheets level 1. And if you come up with the information that still it's not properly implemented with a standard web-based renderers, then this is a catastrophe. It's not professional.
No, but I imagine you're not printing from this. You're converting to another format, getting PDF or using someone else to render it.
I ported LaTeX to run on iOS.
What?
I ported LaTeX to run on iOS, and I export to LaTeX, and it can also print from direct from WebKit as well.
So yes, all those libraries that you need in JavaScript implementations create, of course, dependencies.
Yes.
You are locked into those libraries, no matter what libraries you come up with. And if they're not standardized and in the control of a public organization. But let's discuss at the end.
Now, when I talk about the browser engines, and you raised an important point there about the fact that there are limitations in there. It's open source. We can fix that, right?
No, I doubt it.
Any one of us here can go
It's
in
a
and
moving
contribute to
target.
They're moving target.
When
Yeah,
millions of
thousands
people move
Yeah.
the target, you cannot fix it.
But
Because once you fixed it, the aim is not there anymore. But that's another thing.
okay, but essentially that there is the spec, right? And not all of the spec is implemented, and we shouldn't just restrict ourselves to necessarily only contributing to, or only restricting our sort of sphere of development to necessarily something that's an Apache project. If we need to go into WebKit and fix something in WebKit so that we can use it for our benefit, there's nothing stopping anyone from going to do that. So we could, anybody could come along and say, well, I'm going to fix this thing in WebKit so we can do printing from this Apache project, you know.
One other
Yeah.
thing, Peter, just to clarify. Please remember that the project in suggestion is a set of building blocks. If you don't like the editor, write another, and it's possible. That's a big change to, for example, OpenOffice. That's a complete set. You can't just pick a little bit. If you like the conversion engine, use that. If you like the editor but don't like the conversion engine, use the editor.
That's a really important because
Yeah.
you can use PHP, Python, anything that would basically be working the way you're describing it. But
So the idea is a set of reusable components. It's not one monolithic.
That's exactly the idea of OpenOffice. If you have the UNO architecture, well,
Yeah, I went to the last.
Try and replace the editor in OpenOffice. There you have to go into the kernel.
But you're still back at the same problems. You've got ODT, and you want to convert ODT. You want to take an ODT that somebody with their OpenOffice, LibreOffice created, and you want to put it on here. So you have to have the various features mapped in, and you have to have the features, and you have to be able to map them really back out.
Yep.
Unless you start losing a lot of stuff.
that's exactly, you just hit it exactly
Okay,
on the
well,
nail.
and they need to render the same way.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually I'll talk about that. There's responsive design is extremely important in web development these days. It used to be, you know, pre iPhone, it would be that every web designer there, they wanted an exact pixel perfect layout, and you have to use, you know, they use tables to do layout, and they wanted to make sure it looks exactly, you know, to the pixel like it was. Now, what happens when you want to view that web page that's been designed for a 24-inch monitor? You want to view it on this, right? It's terrible, right? It's just really not pleasant to use. When you view a web page on the iPhone, not all sites do this, but sites that are designed to be usable on mobile will show you the text in a format that is appropriate for use on the iPhone. When you use an ebook reader, it will reflow the text. And you can even change your text size. So the number of pages in your ebook will change depending on whether or not you're holding it like that or like that, right? And pages.
That's the problem with the ebook format.
I would argue that's an advantage of the ebook format, because I don't want to read an A4 document on this, right? You might be able to see that. I wear these glasses. And at some point I'm going to get a new pair so I can read A4 documents on my iPhone. But I would argue that that's actually an advantage of the ebook format.
You're making a mistake. You're talking about DIN A4, but that's not DIN A4 unless you have a DIN A4 size tablet or DIN A4 display.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also target documents with other formats of that to be presentable on that object.
But you're not arguing against the idea of responsive design.
No.
Right, so let's move on from that.
Okay, so for the purposes of this project, we think of responsive design as being important. Yes, of course, there are situations where you want to have an exact replication of the rendering. OXML does not give you that guarantee, and ODF does not give you that guarantee, because I've looked at the ODS spec, there's no layout algorithms there, right? It's dependent on the implementation, and the way that OpenOffice renders a document could be different to how something else renders it. So,
And this has given us a lot of grief to it.
That's
Yeah.
a problem, but that's one of the problems.
right, so PDF is really the only viable output if you want to make sure that the other person is going to see exactly the same
Well,
page
ambiguity.
separation.
And we're actually going to
Anyway, so okay, so just moving forward. So what we're proposing here is, so we're in the process of putting together a formal proposal for an incubator project, and Jan Iversen has agreed to be the champion of the project, and so this is been christened the Corinthia project,
like a hotel.
named after the hotel we were in when we had to find a name. We actually had another name Socrates that we were using, but we found out 4 days ago that there's another project, and it's an online markdown editor that's called Socrates. So
just close enough that
yeah, we didn't want to sort of have confusion there. So Corinthia project. So we've got two libraries that exist currently. So these are basically taken directly from UXWrite, although they've been kind of adapted and cleaned up a bit so they can be totally independent of UXWrite itself. Initially, they only ran on iOS and OS 10, and so the converter, which is actually a C library, and I'll talk about why that is in a second. That runs on OS 10, iOS, Linux, and Windows. I haven't tried to run it on Android yet, but it just uses standard Linux C library APIs, so getting it running on Android should not be difficult.
What about Firefox OS? There's nothing out
Right.
That's
Okay.
an interesting question.
So the solution the solution there, that's a very good question. So the solution, now, by the way, the reason that that's written in C and not in JavaScript is performance. Now, I said earlier, modern JavaScript runtimes are very fast and so forth, and that's true. When I wrote this, I was kind of looking at, and keep in mind that there's a historical reason for this. At the time that I was doing this, Apple did not allow just-in-time compilation for JavaScript when it's running in an app on the iPhone or the iPad, because they didn't want writable code pages in application processes. So I didn't have access to that JavaScript performance. With iOS 8, they have that. So that's why I chose to write it in C, and that's enabled me to do a lot of optimizations. But there is mscripten, which will let you compile C code to JavaScript, and it will do it in ASM.js format. So when you're running it on Firefox, it will be possible to run that library using JavaScript on Firefox.
But Peter, before you get ahead of yourself, what we have here is not a finalized product. We have a project and a lot of work ahead of us.
Sure. Yes.
And yes, it's possible. If you're a developer and you join us,
Everything is possible.
Patch is welcome.
We just need people coming in, doing it. What we make sure is that we have a basis that it can be done.
And we're being purposely provocative and controversial because we want you running, who has a strong opinion, who knows what he's talking about, to come up and say, no, I have a better way of doing this.
We want the arguments.
With JavaScript and cascading style sheets. And I know, well, but let's put it back to the discussion.
We want the heated discussions on the mailing lists and all of that. We want those to have a purpose for this project.
What is
We
important
want them
is
to be about big things.
Right, but one of the basic things that you mentioned the other day and that is here is you're using HTML and using the DOM. And one of the things that we recently did a study on this because we were looking at actually doing something similar, and we started off thinking, yeah, that's also how we want to do this. We also want to basically have this a DOM. And right now, actually, the DOM is losing out in our internal discussions to canvas because we decided with large documents, it just basically goes and in browsers like Chrome, you can have real problems.
Well,
and you have also the problems with the differences between the different browsers.
Mm-hmm.
And if we basically do this via an HTML5 canvas, we save up, we can do much better with the interoperability between the different browsers, and we also don't have the problems with the DOM getting too big.
Sure, all you have to do is spend a few years writing a layout engine.
Peter, again, we are just telling where the project is right now. We might, half a year, with your help again, be in a place where we say, like you say, DOM is not the right one, but DOM, it's in there right now.
We're not sure. This is just the discussion where it's currently going.
Yeah,
because
and
of
that's
the
the
HTML5 canvas,
discussion.
you also can draw in the HTML5
We're not criticizing your point. We're just saying that this is basically not even fully scripted as an incubator project. This is a proposal.
Oh, okay.
And so we're trying to make it general. But we realize that the best way to have a proposal is to have a concrete object people can point to, say they like, say they dislike, see the problems of, see how they can improve it, see how their own experiences can make a difference. Because that's how open source works. We never start from scratch. We only do best when we're critiquing something and improving it.
And also, this is not a panacea. This is not supposed to be all things. This is not supposed to be all things to all people. And the approach, I mean, if you were to do a canvas-based thing, that would really be throwing away everything we've done with the editor and creating something entirely new. And so, you know, I mean, you could do that, but, you know, we've already got this and it works, and, you know, the browsers are established, and it can handle, I mean, I've tested with up to 500,000 word documents on my iPad, and it handles it just fine.
But
So-
Peter, once we are an incubator project, once we have a community and mailing list, this is exactly the discussions we should have. And I hope, as a champion, that we get a lot of committers who are not only developing code, but criticizing, discussing, is this the right way to do it?
Yes,
I think these are great discussions. This is kind of
this
fun.
is exactly what we wanted.
Give
This
us
discussion.
a month and we'll be there.
Okay. Okay, so just one more slide to present. So this is just kind of the basic architecture of it. So these are the two libraries. There's the converter and there's the editor. So this is a C library. This is running in JavaScript. And the idea is that you can build your app using whatever sort of user interface technology you want. Whether that's, in the case of UX Write, that's Cocoa Touch and Objective-C, which is the standard way of building apps for the iPad and the iPhone. On Windows, you might use the Win32 API, or if you want to be a bit more modern, you might want to use, I'm not sure what I don't touch Windows, so I don't know, but you could use Qt, you could use GTK. If you're doing a web-based version, you could use various web-based toolkits. But the point is, you can put anything on top of this, right? And this is back-end code. The user does not interact with this directly. We have an application sitting on top of that, which makes use of these libraries and then figures out what kind of interface it presents to the user.
The reason why this is actually important too is that when Peter was starting the presentation, he was pointing out that there are many formats out there, many documents out there, different formats. This allows people essentially to work with those different formats, those millions of documents, without having to have dedicated applications that express primarily in one format or another. I know that OpenOffice can express it all in XML. I know that it can express in DOC. This does a version of that, only more silently.
So I'm going to be giving another talk tomorrow that focuses on this library, but just very briefly. This is what is sort of the interface between HTML and between other file formats. And one of the most important things about it, but perhaps the most important thing, is that it does non-destructive updates. So if there's some feature of ODF that's been used in a document, maybe you've got an embedded spreadsheet, maybe using some formatting option. Like I think in ODF you can have like double underline. HTML only lets you do single underline. Right? So if you've got stuff that's using double underline formatting, it will preserve that, right? So when you convert to HTML, it creates the HTML version of the document, and then when you update, it takes the original document and the modified HTML, and then it produces an updated version in the original format, and it only changes the stuff that has been changed in the HTML. Anything that hasn't been touched is just left as is. So it will preserve content there that's not supported by the library. And in my talk tomorrow, I'll be going into a lot more detail about how it actually does that. So that's the last slide. So further discussion. I know we've only got a few minutes, and I'm sure there'll be some great discussions later on today in the conference. But anything else?
I'll just actually add one thing. We're not seeking to replace OpenOffice or anything like that. This is not a threat to OpenOffice. This is anything, an extension, a lifeblood, a transfusion, a motivation, and showing that ODF can be totally relevant for the future, that open source on mobile is very, very important, and it can express and read, say, ODF documents as well as all XML.
We want it to be a new member of the family.
Exactly. But we also want to draw from other people in Apache. This is a totally Apache kind of project, because Apache has a wealth of developers and communities that are exactly engaged in this kind of work. Cloud, web, mobile, desktop, this place basically. So this is not a threat to existing projects. It's kind of an extension and a realization that, oh my God, this has been going on. We have to get open source in mobiles for productivity suites or applications.
Any other comments that you can fit in 60 seconds?
I can just say we expect to propose the proposal within a month. Anybody who wants to sign up as initial committers are more than welcome.
Please. And if you have gripes, controversy, it's a new project, you can have fun.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.